Hello, I'm Dr. Gloria Horsley, and we're so happy to have you on our webinar today. We've asked Dennis Apple if he would be on our show, and Dennis is a bereaved dad. His son Denny died in 1991 after brief illness, and Dennis is wonderful to have on for the idea of talking about spiritual aspects because he serves as a staff pastor at the College Church of Nazarene in Kansas, where he lives with his wife Buelah. And he's an author of a wonderful book called Life After the Death of My Son, What I Am Learning. And I love that Dennis says, what I am learning. It's a wonderful book, and I highly recommend getting it and also listening to the radio show. Well, Dennis, welcome to this webinar. We're very excited to have you on today and very appreciative that you have been willing to come on for us.
Thank you, Gloria. It's good to be with you and to talk about this issue that we are, it's on a lot of our minds as we come up to Easter time especially.
It certainly is for mine because our son Scott was killed in 1983 in an automobile accident 1 minute before Easter. And I always kind of wonder if it really was 1 minute before Easter, or if that was the people who found him feeling like they didn't want us to have to suffer through 2 holidays. But whatever, the idea of a resurrection and a Christ was certainly very comforting to us, not necessarily at that time. And I want to talk about that too because, gosh, I sure wondered where God was. But could you talk a little bit about Dennis and about your wife and your experience?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Go back to when the time that Denny died. He was 18 years old, strong, athletic kid, a triathlete even, and I was going to take, at that time I was overseeing the singles ministry. We were going to take a bus to Colorado for a ski trip, and about 3 days prior to that trip, he came down with mononucleosis, and so the doctor said, well, here's the medicine, he can go on the trip, but he won't feel so hot. But anyway, being on medicine and being a fit kid, I thought he was just fine, but I went to wake him up on February the 6th, 1991, and found that he had died in his sleep, Gloria. And boy, I go back, even as I tell you that, it just, raises the hair on the back of my neck as I think of that awful moment when I discovered his lifeless body. And I could go on, and I will talk more about that in a moment. But, one of the things that I'm telling you this because years prior, back in Indiana, I had been chaplain to a support group for people who are grieving. And I would quite often hear people talk about journaling and how that had really helped, preserve their sanity as they were trying to grieve a horrible loss. And so the very next day, on February the 7th, I was in my bedroom and I didn't want to leave. I thought, oh my God, I've got to face, the funeral home and finding a place to bury him, all of those things. And I saw a notebook. I grabbed that notebook and I just scribbled out a couple paragraphs. And it was like a plea. It was like a prayer for help. My God, help me. I'm going to make it. And so that became the first of almost 5. I did that every day for almost 5 years. I had no idea I was going to do it at the time, but it just the next day I do it. And often at night I would journal while my wife Buelah was crying into her pillow next to me. And I just felt so helpless, Gloria. But I did it, and then I stopped after 5 years, and they accumulated back in the back closet. And then about 3-4 years ago, my friend Harold Smith said, Dennis, you need to write and share your journey. He coached me a little, and so he said, why don't you write down the 10 most important things that you have learned since Denny across these years about grief. And so I thought, okay, I can do that. I went back to that back closet, pulled out those journals, and that was the hardest part, Gloria, to read back through the horror, the absolute horror of my horrible journey. And I did. I finally got through that and, took some notes. So the way the book is laid out, it has a lot of my journal entries from those days. And so I used that as the kind of, as a matter of fact, that's what I thought the book was going to be named or titled, the 10 most important things I've learned. But the publisher changed it to what it is. So Life After the Death. My son is
Well,
what
that's yes. What a wonderful book to get, and it's very compelling,
yeah.
and it does take you through that journey. So let's move on to talk about this question that we're going to talk about today, and that is, so many people, Dennis, have said to us, "Where is God after loss?" And we have so many people wondering, how to integrate their religion into their life, how to find God again, and many questions. So why don't you start out by talking a little bit about some of the questions that you've heard?
Sure, yeah, and to preface that, I would take a sentence or two from the Compassionate Friends, as we know, is a support group for bereaved parents. And I'm well aware of the fact that even those listening today may not all come from my faith background. Compassionate Friends, they say, some of us have found our faith to be a source of strength, and some of us are struggling to find answers. So I just want to acknowledge the fact that not everybody believes in the Christian Bible, such as I do. And so I just want to say I'm aware of those out there. And so I will reference some scripture here and from the Bible, but again, grief is grief, no matter who you are, what you believe in. It is just a horrible thing. But here we go. I many times, and in my case, my son's funeral was held right here in the church. I'm sitting not too many yards away from that 4,000-seat sanctuary, and so to go back to church, my colleagues here told me to take as much time as you need, but I'm telling you, Gloria, when I went back to church, it was one of the scariest things I have ever experienced in my life. I had no idea the feelings that would overwhelm me. I felt so fearful. C.S. Lewis one time, he said, nobody told me, or I had no idea that grief feels so much like fear. And you do. It just feels horrible. And so
I would think for you it could be very difficult because it was your job also.
Oh yeah. Oh
and,
yeah. I thought I needed a seat belt on my chair that morning. I mean, I couldn't hardly stand being in there.
Yeah.
And so
I found the music very difficult too.
Oh yeah.
Brings,
Absolutely.
for a long time, I thought the music was very difficult. I liked your comment on healing suggestions here, is go to another church where nobody knows you. Now, that's really an interesting idea, to a way to kind of reintegrate and to be kind of with yourself and take a look at where you are, not because you're so feeling other people are judging you or looking at you or whatever. And I like to go late and leave early.
Go in late, leave early, because you just being around people. But and sometimes your own church. I know one guy said felt so offended at his own church. He said, "Man," he said, "I go to my church." He said, "They tell me how I ought to feel." He said, "Do I go to this other church where they have a particular ritual they go through?" And he said, "All they do is let me be there and cry, and they hug me." And I thought, yeah, that's great, But sometimes grievers like us, we have to go to other church where no one knows us, or where they will be understanding and will allow us to be able to express our grief and our pain.
And maybe telling your own story, or there could be a bad experience. We've received some questions from our Facebook page, and also people knowing that we were going to do the webinar. We invite them to give us questions. And Paul sent us this question, and he said, "My daughter took her own life, and although my pastor hasn't said anything bad, I feel like he's judging me and my wife. It makes me not want to go to church." Have you got any suggestions?
Well, and I think many times, this is a stigma. Of course, we in the story of the crucifixion of Jesus, we know, of course, that the no more infamous Judas took his own life, and we just summarily consign him to the bad place, and I think it's good sometimes if a person feels that way to go to the pastor and just talk honestly with them about that, and hopefully they could do that. Certainly, I've conducted a lot of funerals across the years, and I know not everybody sees it that the way I do, but I tell them, I said, especially children, young people like this that take their own lives, something has broken inside of them. And our God, the God that I believe in, is a God of mercy and compassion, and who understands that this person had something go wrong in them that caused them to do this. And so I tried to help people at that point and put them at ease and to rest, but not to think, as one person said, it's the last sin that you can ever repent of. See, I just don't believe that.
Well,
And
I
so,
like that thought, and I love the idea of going to your pastor. I think we sometimes think that we put thoughts in their own head, we may feel guilty or whatever. But I also think, Paul, that if it's uncomfortable for you to go, you can ask a friend to go too, or you
exactly.
can ask someone else, or you can write a note. You
Mm-hmm.
know, sometimes we don't have the ability to go hit it directly on, so very
Yeah.
good. Well, let's go up to our question 2 and talk about what if I'm angry with God about what happened. Wow, have I ever heard that a lot or thought it?
Oh
Or and
boy.
how about
Oh.
you? There you are at the church and pastor, and you know why would this happen? I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah. Oh, you don't have enough time, Gloria, to hear this. But when I when I flipped Denny's body on the floor, and I tried to revive him, and my brother who lived with us came. He was an EMT, and he said, "Oh, Dennis, he's gone." And I remember my first words, Gloria, and I turned around and I screamed. These words came screaming out of my throat. I said, "Oh God, this is not supposed to happen to me." And I just, I had this silly notion that just because I'm a pastor or a minister, I'm on God's side. This is not supposed to happen at my house. And I mentioned in the book that I guess I get this idea from the story of the Exodus. Prior to the Exodus in the Old Testament, the children of Israel were told to place the blood of the lamb on their doorpost, and that the death angel would pass over. That's where we get the term Passover. And so I thought, just because I'm a minister, it won't happen here. So of course, when I began to come out of the shock a few weeks later, that initial shock, I realized I was so angry. I mean, people would tell me stories in the hallway, as often they do in church. They'd say, "Oh, we almost had an accident, but my guardian angel saved me from this." And I tell you, I was so angry. I wanted to spit on their shoes and say, "Get the blankety blank out of here." I was so mad, so angry, and yet I couldn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anyone. I kept it all bottled up inside of me, which I don't recommend, but this is what I did, and I did that for about 4 years, honestly. And
Okay, so
I was
4 years, everybody out there, it's important to hear that. 4 years, this
oh,
is a long process.
oh yeah. Oh, so very, very long. And I tell people to be patient with yourself and realize that God is patient with you too. Our Heavenly Father understands this, and to know that as I have there on the slide from Psalms, that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And so please, please, please be patient with yourself. Just continue and express your anger to God. And sometimes a prayer can only say, "God, I'm really angry about this, and I don't understand it. Amen."
Okay, well, I like that. Yeah. Now, I want to get this email from Janet. Janet emailed us on our Facebook page. She said, "I lost my son Daniel from the effects of a terrible car accident and a combination of medicine he was prescribed to help him deal with pain. He was fun-loving," and she goes on to say she's had professional help, but she still doesn't feel great. She said, "I cry a lot. His death is so awful and seems so unfair. What could I have done? And
Oh
why did
yeah.
God allow this to happen?"
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And there are a lot of people around us, especially in church, who will the people that will try to ascribe some awful thing that has caused this, and that's one of the biggest things that we face in church. Folks, the cause and effect. Okay, you must have done something. You must have sinned. And it reminds me of the feeling that was in the scripture, even in Jesus. And I remember that I was studying last week when he healed the blind man, and the disciples came up to him and said, "Lord, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he should be born blind?" And we do the same thing with grief, you see. The people carry that through even today. Well, that person must have done something bad, or else this would not fall on them. And they don't realize that we live in a fallen world, and these things happen. And it's not because of some sin that you've committed.
Mm-hmm. Boy, if people could just grab a hold of that. We live in a fallen world, and it is not because of a sin that
Oh
you
yeah.
have committed.
Oh yeah. Oh yes, yes, yes. I just hope that sinks deep into their hearts.
And if it's the same Janet, I think her son died on November 9th. And Janet, may I say to you, that is very, very early. That is a
Yeah.
very short time. Really, I was talking the other day to someone about the fact that we have a freeze. We kind of freeze up when it happens, and we're frozen for some time, and then we start thawing out and start feeling our feelings again. It can even feel worse. It's a paradox because we're really getting better. Because as we feel our emotions, we're starting to move along, but it feels maybe worse than it did even the first few months. So hang in, Janet, and we're there for you, and visit us on Open to Hope. So let's get to our third question. What if my loved one's funeral was in the church?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. You're saying that you're sitting right by where Dennis held his funeral. How was that?
Oh yeah, boy, going back in there and been in those first few years, and again to the one that you just mentioned, Gloria. I mean, we understand that for those bereaved parents, and especially you lost a child suddenly like this, we classify fresh grief as anything under 2 years. But back in the church, the funeral in the church, and it can again go back to what I said earlier. Sometimes going to another church can be helpful. But here's another thing that I had by way of to mention that the church can be of help, and we're coming up on Easter, and we do this here. We take advantage of the rituals and the symbols that the church
Heather, why don't you go to the next slide? I think he's got a picture. Yeah.
And,
so,
go ahead. It is, and I'm glad, thanks for bringing that up. I wanted you to see these. The memorial lilies, they're in the upper right. We're coming up on this. As a matter of fact, we're doing it now. We put it in the church bulletin and say, if you would like to memorialize your loved one, you can pay $10 and it'll purchase a lily. It'll be at the front of the church. And on Easter Sunday morning, there will be a bulletin, and you can see a copy of it there on the lower left. That's something of the way it looks like, and they'll have the person's name and then the family that that are memorializing that person and their relationship to them. And these kinds of things can help us to be able to have our pain acknowledged by the entire church fellowship. And the flowers that you see there in the lower right, they are pulpit flowers that we put there. We did it this year. It was when we come up on Denny's death date, why we the church gives opportunity for us to buy these flowers, to have them there. And then there's a piece in the bulletin that says the flowers are in memory of, in our case, Denny Apple, presented by his mom and dad and his brother. And so the church is in a wonderful place and a wonderful position where we can offer these I'm going to call them rituals or ways in which we can help to keep that person's name alive. And for those of us lost children, that's exactly what we want to do. We don't want ever them to be forgotten. And so the church can do this. And if your church does not do this, well, they didn't in my case. Through these years, I've been able to educate them here, and they've started a lot of these things since my own son's death.
What a great idea. And then did I read somewhere that you can take them home with you after?
Exactly. I failed to mention that. After the service, then you take that flower home with you. And we do the same thing at Christmas time with the poinsettias.
Well, I want to go to another question. Another statement from Alex. Alex says, I long for comfort of God. The problem is I feel such guilt and shame because I was driving the van when our 11-year-old son was killed. I fell asleep, and I think in some ways I want God to punish me. Any thoughts? Wow.
Yeah, boy, that's heavy. Yeah, that's so heavy, and my heart goes out to him, and I felt the same way. I heard my boy breathing the night before. I many times I felt so responsible for my son's death because I heard him breathing kind of hard and loud, and I thought, well, he's on medication and he's fit. The doctor said he could go skiing, and so I kind of, thought, well, he sounded like a child that when his throat was, when they have a bad head cold and they're trying to sleep and you can hear that they're breathing. And when, I found him dead, I just said, oh my God, why didn't I? And still now, I wish I could go back and take that night back. But our senior pastor looked at me and he said, Dennis, you did everything a responsible parent could do, and we still lost him. And so I still had a measure of guilt over that, and I think this is something that when you feel that way is to be able to go to a pastor or a counselor and to talk with them about that and to have them to help you to resolve that, because that's going to have to be, you're going to have to sit with that. You're going to have to talk about that and forgive yourself for what happened. And I know that just grief in and of itself, if he had not been part of the cause of that, it would be bad enough. But then to have this on top of it is is staggering.
I know people say this about, and my husband somewhat felt that about my cousin's son who was driving the car where Scott was killed. He also died. But have you ever noticed how many times you have almost a near accident in the year? I mean, it's just a split second thing in life.
Yeah.
An icy road or a wet road or whatever. It's
exactly.
That self-forgiveness can be tough.
Yeah,
what you said reminds me, I know Dennis died of an infection, and we've got a question here from Fran. She says, I still don't know how just God can let an innocent baby die in a matter of hours from a staph infection. How does that happen?
No, yeah, and I could take that. How could I let my boy die? How does that happen? And I'm telling you, boy, that I wish we had more time, but I can just tell you that I pondered that for a long time, and I thought, how? Because I had prayed the night before. Buelah and I had knelt by his bed, laid our hands on his head, and prayed for him, and then to find him dead. I'll tell you, my faith just went crazy, and here I am trying to pastor and try to ponder this. But I tell you, my Bible gathered dust. I didn't pray except when I would do for dinners and weddings and funerals and things. Inside, I was a mess, and I thought, how could God allow me to do this? And it took me into a place that we don't have time probably to really go through here, my own spiritual journey. But I felt, though, I finally came to the place where I thought, we live in a broken world. We live in a fallen world where bad things happen. I do not understand this. I don't understand why God would allow this to happen. But I came to there's so much I've got to cut through here, because this took months and years for me to sort through. But I finally came to the place, Gloria, where I asked myself, number one, do I believe that there is a God that is a sovereign God who sees and oversees all this? And secondly, am I going to trust in this God whom I do not understand? The prophet Isaiah says his ways are as far above our ways as the heavens are above the earth. And I do not understand this. And so I tell people, even in the book, I hung out near the back door of my faith for a long, long time. I was going to run away as a kid, that pack his suitcase up and leave the house. But I knew that out there was nothing either. So I had to work through this, and it took years. So I tell this person to be patient with themselves as they try to reconcile themselves to all of this.
And it sounds like at some level you found not only a forgiveness but a surrender.
I really did, but it took much longer than I ever dreamed it would take. I had no idea. I've gone back now.
But how have you come out with God on the other side?
Yeah, well, again, years and years and years. I've come out now to the place where I feel like I have a better relationship with God. I can pray again and feel like I'm having an audience with God. But that took years, like you said, Gloria. It's frozen. I mean, that thawing process, if you want to put it that way, takes much longer.
Absolutely.
And the church is filled with the buck up and get over it people. And boy, I tell you, that doesn't help. That doesn't help.
Right. Well, let's move on, because I want to talk a little bit about the empty place at the table and how you deal with that. And I wanted to just give you another comment I had from Rachel. Rachel says, I used to love the holidays, and now I just hate them. It's been 2 years. Do you think it'll ever get better? And let's move on to the next slide about how can I face the empty chair and talk about that.
Oh, yeah. Boy, I just resonate with these questions so much, because I kept thinking and hoping, said, oh, God, please, why can't we just have a year without holidays? And because every time families would come together, I just felt the hole in our family and the empty chair at our table just seemed even worse. But I tell people to change up the family tradition, and we did that certainly. We just took off. We were accustomed to eating Easter dinner alone. Well, we went out to a buffet, went someplace else, someone else's house. Just I couldn't face into it yet. I just had to get out of there, and so I encourage people to do that. Change up, go someplace else, and don't do that to yourself at this point. Later on, you can ease into it, but oh my goodness, go out to eat, change it up, have somebody else host it, lean on your friends to do that. Let them know what you need, but don't go back in and pretend like everything is normal, because it's not. I mean, you've lost
Absolutely.
someone. You know.
Now, one of the things I suggest is that if you feel like you need to have this person recognized at the dinner, it's always great to ask a friend or someone else if they give a toast to them, or
Yeah.
if you feel like you need to have something that you may be going to a restaurant or whatever, have a little ritual at home before you go. You know, get
Mm-hmm.
yourself a lily and a candle and do what you
Sure.
need to do, hold hands
Yeah.
and say a prayer, sing a
Yeah.
song, talk about
Yeah.
their favorite memory. And that's one thing I want to remind you, try to find at least one happy memory about them to share at your Easter table this year, or one thought about something that they enjoyed or that they said that was funny or that you liked about them. You know, try to at least hang on to maybe some special memory that you have. Well, Dennis, I want to thank you so much for being on this Easter webinar today. It's been wonderful, and I want to remind people to get Dennis's book. You can get it, The Life After the Death of My Son. You can get it on Amazon. It's really a wonderful book. I assume Amazon, right, Dennis?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Sure is.
Okay, and it's got his journey on it and wonderful ideas. And also, I wanted to remind you that this webinar is going to be made into a YouTube, so you'll be able to listen to it again and tell your friends about it during this Easter season. And many blessings to you all this Easter. And Dennis, thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for being here.
And have a pleasant Easter holiday, and thanks for all the good that you're doing for everyone. And thanks to Heather Johnson for hosting this webinar today.
Sure.